To understand medieval astrology, you have to forget our modern picture of space. Forget the cold, empty vacuum. Forget galaxies spiraling in an endless, indifferent void. The medieval cosmos was not empty, it was full, it was alive, and it was all connected. Their universe was a neat and tidy place, the Earth was at the very center of everything. It was stable and unmoving. Around it, in perfect circles, spun a series of invisible spheres. Think of them like nested glass shells. Each of the 7 known planets had its own sphere. First came the Moon, then Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and finally Saturn. Beyond Saturn was the 8th sphere, which held all the fixed stars, and beyond that was the home of God. This wasn't just a physical model, it was a spiritual and philosophical one. Everything had its place in a grand cosmic hierarchy. God was at the top. The angels were below him. Then came the stars and planets, then humanity, then animals, plants, and finally rocks and minerals at the bottom. This was the great chain of being. Everything was linked. A movement in the heavens caused a ripple effect all the way down to Earth. Nothing happened in isolation. The core idea was simple: as above, so below. What happened up there in the heavens directly influenced what happened down here on Earth. The planets weren't just chunks of rock or balls of gas. They were living, active forces. Each one had a distinct personality, a specific quality or character. Mars was hot, dry, and aggressive. It governed war, anger, and surgeons. Venus was warm, moist, and gentle. It governed love, beauty, and art. The Moon was cold and wet, ruling over moods, the public, and things that change quickly. Saturn was cold, dry, and restrictive. It was the planet of old age, farming, death, and limitations. These planetary forces were thought to stream down to Earth, mixing and combining in complex ways. They didn't just affect big events like wars or the crowning of kings, they affected everything. They shaped the weather, the growth of crops, the tides of the sea, and most importantly, they shaped the human body and mind. The human body was seen as a small-scale version of the universe, a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. Just as the universe was made of 4 elements, fire, air, water, and earth, the human body was governed by 4 corresponding humors. These were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person had these 4 humors in perfect balance. Sickness was simply an imbalance. Too much yellow bile, which was hot and dry like fire, made you choleric, or quick to anger. Too much black bile, which was cold and dry like earth, made you melancholic or sad. And what caused these humors to go out of balance? The planets. Each planet was associated with certain elements and humors. A person born when Mars was strong might have an excess of yellow bile, making them naturally aggressive and ambitious. Someone born under the influence of the Moon might have more phlegm, making them more passive and emotional. So astrology wasn't some fringe belief, it was science, it was the physics and biology of its day. It was based on a complete and coherent view of the universe. To a medieval scholar, a doctor, or a king, ignoring the stars would be like a modern sailor ignoring the weather forecast. It wasn't superstition, it was a practical tool for understanding how the world worked. The sky was not a distant, abstract thing. It was a clock, a calendar, and a map of divine intention. It was a living, breathing system, and humanity was woven directly into its fabric. The question wasn't if the stars had an influence, but how to read that influence correctly. The most personal use of astrology was to understand a single human life. This wasn't about a daily horoscope you'd read for fun. It was a serious, complex, and lifelong endeavor. It all started with the moment of birth. When a child was born, the first and most important thing to do was to note the exact time and place. An astrologer would then use this information to create a natal chart, or a nativity. This chart was a map of the heavens at that precise moment. It showed the exact position of the sun, the moon, and all the planets against the backdrop of the 12 zodiac constellations. This map was seen as a kind of celestial blueprint for the person's entire life. It didn't seal your fate in an absolute way, but it laid out the raw materials you had to work with. It was your nature, your temperament, your potential strengths and weaknesses. It revealed the hand you were dealt. How you played that hand was, to some degree, up to you. The chart was a circle divided into 12 sections called houses. Each house governed a different area of life. The first house was about your personality and physical appearance. The second house was about money and possessions. The 7th house was about marriage and partnerships. The 10th house was about your career and public reputation, and so on. The astrologer's job was to interpret this complex map. Where were the planets located? A planet's power was strengthened or weakened, depending on which zodiac sign and which house it was in. For example, Mars, the planet of war, was said to be at home in the sign of Aries. So, a person born with Mars in Aries would be expected to be extremely direct, brave, and perhaps impulsive. If that Mars was also in the 10th house of career, this person might be destined for a military life or another profession that required aggressive action. But if Mars was in the sign of Libra, a sign of balance and harmony, it was considered to be in a weak position. This person might struggle with decisiveness or have trouble asserting themselves. If this weak Mars was in the 7th house of marriage, it could point to conflict in relationships. The astrologer also looked at the relationships between the planets. These were called aspects. Were two planets close together in a conjunction, their energies would merge. Were they in opposition on opposite sides of the sky? Their energies would be in conflict, creating tension in a person's life. Were they in a harmonious trine? Their energies would work together smoothly, indicating natural talents and good fortune in certain areas. The result of this analysis was a detailed psychological profile. It told you about your fundamental temperament, based on the balance of the four humors. Were you sanguine, dominated by blood, and therefore cheerful and optimistic? Were you phlegmatic, dominated by phlegm, and therefore calm and thoughtful? This was the first layer of understanding. The chart also revealed your potential skills and challenges. A strong Mercury might indicate a gift for speaking and writing. A difficult Saturn could point to a life of hardship, discipline, and hard-earned lessons. Venus well-placed might promise a happy marriage and an appreciation for beauty. This wasn't just for self-discovery, it was deeply practical. A father might have a chart drawn up for his newborn son to decide what career path he should follow. Should he be a scholar, a soldier, or a merchant? The stars could offer guidance. It could help in arranging a marriage. If a man's chart showed a strong conflict with a woman's chart, it was considered a bad omen for their union. The natal chart was not a static thing. It was a seed that unfolded over time. The astrologer could use complex techniques to project the chart forward in time, predicting periods of opportunity or difficulty. They could see when a person might be prone to illness, when they might find success, or when they might face a major life change. It was a dynamic map for navigating the journey from birth to death. It gave a sense of order and meaning to a person's existence. In a world that often felt random and cruel, the natal chart suggested that your life, with all its joys and sorrows, was part of a grand cosmic design. Astrology wasn't just about the grand sweep of a lifetime, it was a tool for the here and now. It helped people make decisions, big and small, every single day. This was the most practical and widespread use of astrology, touching the lives of people from all levels of society. One of the most important branches was called electional astrology. The idea was to choose the most auspicious moment to begin something. The heavens were always in motion, the planetary influences always changing. So, if you wanted your new venture to succeed, you needed to start it under a favorable sky. You didn't just decide to do something, you elected the right time to do it. This applied to almost everything. If you were a king, you would consult an astrologer to pick the right moment to be crowned. The chart for that moment would act as the birth chart for your entire reign. You would also elect a time to declare war, to sign a treaty, or to lay the foundation stone of a new cathedral. Getting the timing right meant giving your project the best possible cosmic tailwind. Getting it wrong could court disaster. But this wasn't just for kings. A merchant would choose a time to send a ship out to sea, hoping for a smooth journey and profitable trade. He'd want the moon to be in a favorable position, and for Mercury, the planet of commerce, to be strong. A farmer would use astrology to decide when to plant his seeds and when to harvest his crops. He would plant under a waxing, fertile moon to ensure good growth. A young couple would consult an astrologer to choose a wedding day, looking for a strong Venus to bless their union with love and a benevolent Jupiter to bring them prosperity. But even small personal actions were timed. People chose auspicious moments to get a haircut, to take a bath, to buy new clothes, or to start taking a new medicine. The logic was always the same. Begin the action when the heavens are aligned with your goal. Another deeply practical use was horary astrology. This was for getting an answer to a specific question. A person would go to an astrologer with a pressing problem. Will my stolen horse be returned? Is my wife faithful? Should I take this job offer? The astrologer would cast a chart for the exact moment the question was asked and understood. The resulting chart was believed to contain the answer. The astrologer would interpret the horary chart using a complex set of rules. The house system would be used to locate the subject of the question. For a question about a lost object, the astrologer would look at the second house of possessions. For a question about a career, they'd look to the 10th house. The position and condition of the planets in those houses and their aspects to other planets would reveal the answer. The answer might be a simple yes or no, or it could be more nuanced, revealing obstacles or hidden factors. It was a form of divination, a way to get a clear answer in a moment of uncertainty. Perhaps the most critical use of astrology was in medicine. Medieval medicine was completely intertwined with astrology. A good physician had to be a competent astrologer. They believed that each part of the body was ruled by one of the 12 zodiac signs. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms and shoulders, and so on, all the way down to Pisces, which ruled the feet. The planets, too, had dominion over different organs and diseases. When a patient fell ill, the doctor would often cast a chart. This could be the patient's birth chart, to understand their underlying constitution and weaknesses. Or it could be a chart for the moment the illness began. This chart, called a decumbiture chart, helped the doctor diagnose the problem. A strong, malevolent Mars in the sign of Aries, which rules the head, might indicate a headache, a fever, or a head injury. Astrology dictated the entire course of treatment. The doctor would use the stars to decide the best time to administer medicine, to perform a bloodletting, or to conduct surgery. You would never, for example, perform a bloodletting on an arm when the moon was in Gemini, the sign that rules the arms. To do so would be to risk serious harm. You would choose a time when the planets were in a helpful configuration. The herbs used in medicines were also linked to planets. A cooling, Venus-ruled herb might be used to counteract a hot, Mars-based fever. The doctor wasn't just treating a body, they were treating a person whose health was directly connected to the wider cosmos. It was a holistic system where healing the body meant bringing it back into harmony with the heavens. Astrology was not just a personal or a medical tool, it was a political weapon. For kings, emperors, popes, and generals, it was an essential instrument of statecraft. The fate of entire nations was believed to be written in the stars, and the ruler who could read them had a powerful advantage. This branch of astrology was known as mundane astrology. It focused not on the individual, but on the collective, on cities, kingdoms, and the world at large. Just as a person had a birth chart, a city or a nation was believed to have one, cast for the moment of its founding or the coronation of its first king. Astrologers used these charts to predict periods of prosperity, famine, plague, or civil unrest. The court astrologer was a figure of immense importance and influence. He was a trusted advisor, a sort of celestial intelligence analyst. His job was to watch the skies for signs of importance. Eclipses were especially significant and were almost always seen as bad omens, often foretelling the death of a ruler or a major disaster for the kingdom. The appearance of a comet was another terrifying event, seen as a divine warning of war, plague, or the fall of a dynasty. The astrologer's task was to interpret these signs. Did this lunar eclipse predict a rebellion at home or a defeat in a foreign war? Where would the blow fall? Rulers depended on this information to make critical decisions. Before launching a military campaign, a king would demand to know the most auspicious time to attack. The astrologer would study the charts of the king and his rival, looking for moments of strength and weakness. He would analyze the position of Mars, the planet of war. A well-timed attack, launched when the king's Mars was strong and his enemy's was weak, could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Our chronicles from the period are filled with stories of battles won or lost because of astrological advice. Succession was another area of intense astrological scrutiny. A king wanted to know the fate of his heirs. He would have nativities cast for all his children to see who was destined for greatness and who might bring trouble. This could lead to intense political maneuvering within the court. As princes with lucky, charts were favored over those with more challenging ones. It also worked the other way. Ambitious nobles might secretly have charts drawn up to predict when the old king might die, hoping to position themselves for the ensuing power struggle. This made being a court astrologer a very dangerous job. Your predictions were public, and your reputation depended on being right. If you predicted a great victory and the army was crushed, you could lose your position, your wealth, and even your life. Predicting the king's death was the most dangerous prediction of all. Even if you were right, you could be accused of treason or of using black magic to make it happen. Many astrologers learned to phrase their predictions in vague, ambiguous language to protect themselves. The rivalry between kingdoms was often played out in an astrological war. Each court had its own astrologers, and they would study the charts of enemy nations, looking for vulnerabilities. They would publish almanacs and prophecies, predicting doom for their rivals, a form of celestial propaganda. A prediction that the enemy king was destined to fall could weaken his authority and embolden his enemies. The use of astrology extended to the highest levels of the church. Although there was always a theological tension, many popes and bishops still employed astrologers. They used it to plan church councils, to choose the right time to lay the foundations of a new church, and even to elect a new pope. They believed that, while God was ultimate, he often worked through secondary causes, and the stars were one of those causes. In the world of medieval power, astrology provided a framework for understanding history and predicting the future. It offered a sense of control in a volatile world. It wasn't just about knowing what would happen, it was about acting at the right time to align human will with cosmic intention. For a ruler, the sky was the ultimate chessboard, and astrology was the rulebook for how to play the game. For all its practical uses, medieval astrology was about something much deeper. At its heart, it was a search for meaning and order in a world that was often confusing, violent, and unpredictable. It provided a powerful answer to the most fundamental human questions. Why am I the way I am? What is my purpose, and what does the future hold? The universe, as seen through the lens of astrology, was not a random collection of events. It was a complex, interwoven tapestry. Everything was connected, and everything happened for a reason. The position of Jupiter at your birth wasn't an accident. It was a piece of information about your character and destiny. A plague wasn't a random biological event, it was a consequence of a malevolent alignment of planets like Mars and Saturn. This worldview provided immense psychological comfort. It suggested that even in the midst of suffering, there was a larger plan, a cosmic logic at work. However, this idea of a predetermined path created a serious conflict with the most important institution of the Middle Ages, the Christian Church. The core of Christian doctrine was the idea of free will. Humans were given the ability to choose between good and evil. Their choices on earth determined the fate of their soul in the afterlife. Salvation depended on making the right choices. Astrology seemed to challenge this directly. If your character and your life events were written in the stars from the moment of your birth, where was the room for free will? If a man was born with a planetary alignment that made him prone to violence and theft, was he truly responsible for his sins? This was the problem of determinism, and it was a theological minefield. Church thinkers wrestled with this problem for centuries. Some, like St. Augustine in the early medieval period, rejected astrology completely. He saw it as a form of pagan fatalism that denied human responsibility and made God irrelevant. He argued that it was a demonic deception, a way for people to blame the stars for their own bad choices. But others tried to find a middle ground. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas argued for a more nuanced view. They made a distinction between two types of astrology. It was acceptable, they said, to study the general influence of the heavens. The stars could affect the physical world, the body, the humors, and our natural inclinations. A man might be born with a natural tendency toward anger because of a strong Mars. This was seen as a part of God's natural law. However, it was heresy to believe that the stars controlled the human soul or overrode the will. They famously said, "The stars incline, they do not compel." Your birth chart might give you a tendency towards anger, but with God's grace and your own free will, you could choose to overcome that inclination. You could choose to be patient and kind instead. So, natural astrology, which studied the influence on bodies and weather, was often seen as a legitimate science. But judicial astrology, which claimed to predict specific future events and seal a person's fate, was seen as a dangerous overreach, a violation of God's providence and human freedom. This compromise allowed astrology to flourish in universities and royal courts, even as it was sometimes condemned from the pulpit. It existed in a state of permanent tension, a fascinating blend of science, philosophy, and faith. So what happened to it? Why did this entire system, which had dominated Western thought for over 1,000 years, eventually fade away? The answer lies in a fundamental shift in how we saw the universe. Starting in the 16th and 17th centuries, the scientific revolution began to dismantle the medieval cosmos piece by piece. First, Copernicus showed that the Earth was not the center of the universe, it was just another planet orbiting the sun. This shattered the neat, hierarchical model that was the foundation of astrological thought. Then, astronomers like Kepler and Galileo showed that planets moved in ellipses, not perfect circles, and that the heavens were not perfect and unchanging. The moon had mountains and craters, just like the Earth. The old living cosmos was replaced by a new one, a vast mechanical universe governed by impersonal laws of physics, like gravity. The planets were no longer seen as active, conscious forces with personalities. They were just objects made of the same stuff as the Earth, moving according to mathematical principles. The as above, so below connection was broken. There was no known physical mechanism by which a planet like Mars could influence a person's temper or the outcome of a war. As this new scientific worldview took hold, astrology lost its status as a science. It was pushed to the margins, becoming an occult belief system rather than a central part of medicine, politics, and daily life. The search for order and meaning didn't go away, but people began to look for it in different places in the new sciences of physics and biology, in new political and economic theories, and in a faith that was now more clearly separated from the workings of the natural world. Astrology's purpose had been to map the connections in a divinely ordered, living world. When that map of the world was erased, astrology lost its place on it.